welcoming the mayor of Highland Park, Nancy Rotering. And let me just say this, yeah, you should be standing to your feet. You really should. You really should. So, I don't remember how many years ago that Nancy and I met, but I remember we met, it was way before that awful July 4th. And I was so impressed with her. She was running for office, and she wanted our support. And I said, well, whether SEIU does it or not, I'm going to support you. What can I do? And she and I have, since then. Then that awful day came. Well, I did share with you about my sons. So my son and only child was murdered. He was shot in the head, and we still don't know today who it was. But like she's holding my hand now, she held it then. And I could feel her sensitivity and her care about that for me. And then it happened to her. It happened to her city, her community. I mean, we gotta do something about this. Again, we gotta be the adults in this. We gotta do something about this. It has to stop. Guess who's doing something about it? This woman. Oh, wait a minute. Let me tell you something. She and I testified before a committee. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah, we testified before a committee, and they couldn't shut us down.
Thank you, dear Jackie. Go get some coffee. I'd like a little bit to talk about if you need some coffee. I will not be offended if you go get some coffee, so go get some coffee. Thank you. What an honor to be with old friends and new friends, and delighted to be with all of you. I am Nancy Rotering, the mayor of Highland Park, and a proud Illinois Democratic woman. So I just want to share some thoughts with you, and I'm dead serious. If coffee is calling you, go, go, go. President Obama, it's been a pretty awesome celebration this past weekend, 15 years ago. Who was there?
Yeah,
I was there in Grant Park on November 3rd. That was amazing.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, not there last night, so. Yeah, 15 years ago, great night. He famously said, you have to go through life with more than just passion for change, you need a strategy. Not just awareness, but action. You do that, all of you in this room. The people supporting and running this vital organization are continuing to turn passion into action. With ongoing dedication to serving without hesitation, our world will hopefully someday begin to heal its wounds and become a better place for all, but most importantly, for our most vulnerable community members. So I want to thank you for having me this evening, and I have to share on behalf of the Highland Park community our absolute gratitude for what so many in this room did and beyond for as we continue on this journey following the worst tragedy in our city's history. Your care, your concern, your outreach, both in the immediate aftermath and continuing even now to this day, 16 months later, have been absolutely critical as we strive to move forward. So the very actions of so many who are here today following the mass shooting in Highland Park highlight what is so important. I'd say more important than ever in current days, turning crises into compassionate action. Compassionate action. So often, especially these days, we hear horrible news, we learn about a terrible situation, we witness a crisis firsthand, and our first instinct is, oh, let's help, let's do something, let's act, and then we hesitate, we pause, we stay silent. We don't quite know what's appropriate. We don't want to overstep. We might feel that some unknown cultural difference is too much of a barrier. We don't want to harm somebody's pride. And as Elie Wiesel once noted, silence encourages the tormentor, not the tormented. So silence isn't really an option. Turning a crisis into action should not present unsurmountable barriers. It might require a shift in perspective or mindset, and instead of focusing on the negative aspects of the situation, see it as an opportunity maybe for education, for response, for recovery. Some instances obviously demand immediate action. Others are aided by identifying the underlying cause of the crisis. But as individuals and as members of organizations like this one, I know we can find appropriate solutions. For example, we all lived through the pandemic and we were forced to find ways to cope and to move forward. And if you think about the many democratic organizations that just sort of sprung up in the quiet and use that opportunity to gather in a new way and to then move forward, we're now seeing that spread into areas where previously there was no public democratic presence, right? And so I say on a personal level, a crisis can also be seen as a chance for self-reflection and growth, leading to personal transformation. It's important to remember that while a crisis can be so very hard, it can also present opportunities for positive growth and change. And I get it. None of us want to make a horrible situation worse by our actions, even if our intentions are the best. We don't want to harm more. But to those who do reach out, regardless of knowing if the pride of the recipient is shaky, even as language might impede our doing things perfectly, even as someone, a community in crisis, is reeling from something as tragic as last summer's shooting or last weekend's shooting or recent events, who are we if we don't take action to heal the world? So in times of crisis, I would say being brave is certainly more important than being perfect, because in these circumstances, being perfect is absolutely the enemy of the good. And while striving for perfection is certainly admirable, it can also lead to indecisiveness and inaction. Taking action can also help inspire those around you, who they too may be having that crisis of confidence, to then spur them to take some good action and to lead to better outcomes. So many of us in this room, I'm just going to hazard a guess by virtue of when we were born, or who we are, or whose we are expected to meet a certain level of detail, a certain level of follow-through, a certain level of achievement, and I get it. But in serving a community in crisis, any community, the very people you are helping are so in shock or grief or fear. They may be hungry, they may be new to a situation, new to being alone, new to being in pain, new to a tragic loss or a trauma. They're appreciative of your care and your compassion, and knowing that another human is standing by their side makes all the difference in the world. It's not even necessarily how, it's just that it happens. So in the wake of last summer's shooting, I heard from people of all strata, from all around the world. We were so appreciative. Some offered, I'll just say, some interesting and unique assistance. I'll leave it at that. But who doesn't need a moment of humor in the wake of a horrific tragedy? Most just offered their care and, of course, their thoughts and their prayers, very simply. To be the mayor of a city in shock and agony and to hear people just cared. We're thinking of us. It was humbling, and it was exactly what I needed. It was exactly what we all needed. And the hugs with strangers and the sharing of stories and the listening, all of this alleviated those overwhelming feelings of isolation and loneliness and shock that happens to you when you're in a crisis. Reaching out also helped build a sense of community and connectedness, both for the giver and for the receiver. Now, there's no handbook for managing the grief and the pain that a mass violence experience can bring to one. Now, there is a 198-page handbook that is sent to mayors in the aftermath of a mass shooting, which is a horrible commentary on the state of our nation. I got the handbook within an hour from Dan Whaley of Dayton, Ohio. She was the first one to send it to me. But for a mayor, or frankly any leader in a mass casualty crisis, it really does start with listening to your heart, putting yourself in the shoes of your community members, those who are in pain, and recognizing the power of your voice, from speaking from within. I also have to say, I had an amazing, amazing team that I was working with. The range of acuity in our situation, as it is in shootings that happen every week, is intense. It's immense. And in addition to the horrific injuries and devastating loss of life, the needs of community members in our case, and often are the case, were incredibly varied, whether it was language differences, immigration status to navigate, varying socioeconomic levels, age, varying mental health situations. It goes on and on. And in the immediate moment of the tragedy, I don't need to tell you this, our kids knew exactly what to do. The rest of us were unable to comprehend. And I can still picture faces, frankly, of people my age and older going, what do you mean active shooter? And the kids were like, run, hide.
Right.
They knew what to do. We've trained them to be ready for an active shooter their entire lives. And again, a few months later, on April 4th, when a gun was brought to our local high school and a hard lockdown was called, the kids, again, knew exactly what to do. Our society has been preparing them for a combat encounter their entire lives. This is the world we've created for the next generation. Let's think about that for a moment. And while our kids were prepared, we as a city had conducted dozens, if not hundreds, of tabletop exercises as first responders. Our police did everything right. Do not talk to me about a good guy with a gun. Our good guys were there in less than 30 seconds. Could not figure out where this was coming from. And didn't have the firepower to meet him. And do we really want to shoot out at the OK Corral every time some idiot pulls out a gun? I don't think so. We're fortunate that public safety mutual aid was already organized, that excellent relationships had been built over the years with our sister and neighbor governments, and that we had area social safety net agencies available. And while crises situations, fortunately, are rare, they present us with unthinkable challenges. And even with the best preparation, we're never fully ready when a tragedy strikes. These horrific events can cause unspeakable pain, not only for the people directly involved, and I'll share with you, my husband was in the hot zone. He stepped over people to come and find me. He dove for his life and waited for the gunfire to end. We had family friends in town, and one of them is still recovering from injuries. She wasn't shot, fortunately, but injuries she sustained just trying to get out of the line of fire. But also for those who bear witness to the tragedy and its aftermath. And the pain of the Highland Park shooting poured not just into our community, it rippled out far and wide. We had over 118 area and federal public safety agencies, over 1,800 personnel providing mutual aid on July 4th and immediately thereafter to assist our community. With our community partners, it's always our goal to create a safety net for our community, ensuring that people have access to resources and services that can help them during difficult times. This collaboration often involves organizations from different sectors, including government agencies, not-for-profits, and private businesses working to address the needs of the community. In our case, they all stepped up, but I've got to say, there are so many communities, and we know they don't have these resources, and they face this violence all the time. And so where are the resources for our sisters and our brothers who are facing this kind of agony, this kind of trauma, this kind of pain all the time? It needs to end. All of it needs to end. And we know that any crisis situation can be chaotic and overwhelming, and it can be challenging to coordinate those efforts in a way that makes sense. Last summer, we were fortunate. We had those agencies, we had those volunteers, we had those resources. They rose to this ultimate of challenges. They were undaunted, and they worked around the clock in the days that followed the tragedy to support our shocked, grieving, and traumatized city. In the weeks and months that followed, they continued to provide unwavering support as they worked with us towards the common goal of getting each of us back up on our feet. But again, who's helping our brothers and sisters in other communities get back up on their feet? Weekend after weekend, holiday after holiday. Is reacting all that we can do? In certain circumstances, yes. I know you're all thinking of certain circumstances, and you're like, all right, well, in that case, we really had to do something right then. In case of human services, for example, providing for those who are underserved or underrepresented, it's often the provision of an absolute lifeline that's critical, that's a response. And we might try to create systemic change to mitigate external variables that make a situation worse, but in other situations, the problem can be, unfortunately, the result of unintended consequences of bad policy, an unbalanced cost-benefit analysis, if you will, a societal cost that's too high, Second Amendment, assault weapons. Where does the balance fall? We have that situation right now with gun violence stealing our ability to live our lives free from the fear of random violence. And as Highland Park resident Elaine Weiss wrote in 2022, right after the shooting, it's not only the loss of life, but the loss of living life that is impacted. 2/3 of Americans have changed the way they live their lives out of fear that gun violence will interrupt their concert, their movie, their trip to the grocery store. I could go on. So I understand tradition and history in the Constitution. You'll see in my bio, I've been a lawyer for over 30 years, but I'm issuing a call to protect human rights and to put an end to what should be called pervasive terrorism. The legally obtained weapon used in Highland Park and in Lewiston and in virtually all of these nearly weekly mass shootings was specifically designed to kill and maim as many people as quickly as possible. And as Judge Easterbrook noted in the Seventh Circuit case challenging Highland Park's right to ban assault weapons in 2015, that's why they're the weapons of choice by mass killers. Yeah. And as you know, we prevailed in that case, and hallelujah, the Protect Illinois Communities Act also prevailed on Friday. Thank you so much. So this debate isn't about whether we're burdening lawful gun owners with new regulations. These constitutional regulations existed before. As many of you know, there already was an assault weapons ban for 10 years between 1994 and 2004. During that time, according to gun violence prevention organization Giffords, mass shooting deaths dropped by over 70%. And then it expired. And those who could act chose not to. This debate is about whether we're taking common sense steps to preserve our public safety and our human rights. Let's call gun violence for what it is, terrorism, a threat to our human rights. Mass shootings are a uniquely American problem, and in 2022, over 647 mass shootings occurred. Do you know how many days of the year there are? Ours was number 309. We know from conversations with the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Victims of Crime, that the impacts of this one person, this 1 minute, will last for years, if not decades, if not lifetimes, and the agony is incomprehensible. Now, I just said mass shootings twice. Nobody in this room really flinched.
Oh, I did.
Oh, good. All right, thank you. What if I said mass human rights violation? We'd pay more attention. So much of our being inured to gun violence is sadly the repetition of these words. We hear gun violence all the time. And what other nation allows normalization of gun violence? Several organizations like the Brady Center are urging that we look at gun violence through a human rights violation lens. Isn't threatening one's life the very clearest violation of their human rights? And human rights are, of course, at the core of social justice. So according to Giffords, nearly every American will know a victim of gun violence in their lifetime, somebody who has been shot to death because of a gun. And looking at this room, I know all of us are thinking of people that we know. It's unbelievable, every American. So I teach a class at Northwestern University. It's called Women in American Political Leadership. Christine would be like, no kidding. My goal is to show undergraduate students the power of their voices, how to be advocates, how to run for office, how to start a not-for-profit to affect change. And so many of our students, particularly women and non-binary college students, suffer from a measurable crisis of confidence. Who can blame them? Among other things, for years, our society has particularly allowed our young people to be at a ridiculously high risk for random violence. And invariably, I get the question, and I've gotten it a lot this past year in general, how do you keep hope in the face of so much adversity? I think many of us have been asking ourselves this question daily lately. And as my husband says, you can't boil the ocean. And I always respond, let's fix what we can. He's such a guy. Well, I mentioned the 198-page handbook sent to mayors in the aftermath of a mass shooting. There's no roadmap telling us what to do when something of the magnitude of our shooting hits home. But the decisions we make, followed by the actions that we take, illustrate who we are and what we can be. And if there's one thing we can do to save another life, to keep another community from this kind of horrific pain, I think we'll agree that we have to try. So in public policy circles, there's the adage that all the easy stuff has been solved. We've just been left the hard ones, like hunger and equitable access to healthcare and education and this nation's pervasive gun culture and so forth. So many issues that create ongoing pain for so many can be pretty overwhelming. But if we look at the progress that's made, maybe it's a little slow, maybe it's a little small, but if it's still moving forward, let's call it for what it is, progress, and let's stay inspired to keep working on the solutions. For example, I recognize that Illinois' statewide ban on assault weapons and large capacity magazines won't stop all gun violence, but if we can make it that much harder for somebody with bad intentions to get a hold of a gun capable of shooting, in Highland Park's case, 83 rounds in under 1 minute, I call it progress. We stopped that one person, or maybe those 10. 12 years ago, after noticing real hardship at many of the doors I was knocking on in my first campaign for mayor, I spearheaded a human services needs assessment in my city. And we looked at the human service needs of youth, seniors, immigrants, people with disabilities, people who were suffering from economic challenges. Then we inventoried the services that were available, identified gaps, synergies, strengths, weaknesses. Who knows what a SWOT analysis is? That's what we did. And then out of all of that, 8 years ago, I founded the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, which focuses on providing free legal services to our most vulnerable neighbors in northeastern Illinois, the areas of immigration, domestic violence, and housing. And during the pandemic, our cases under domestic violence went through the roof. A second silent pandemic was occurring. And I share this story because when there's a crisis in a community, whether it's hunger or trauma or the fear of losing someone's home or their life, making sure that leadership is using its moral compass and compassion as a guide star of action is absolutely critical. In the case of the Legal Aid Clinic, we knew there was a need. We weren't sure what kind, we didn't know what magnitude, we weren't quite sure how the whole thing was going to work out, but by golly, we did it. We put one foot in front of the other, we hung a shingle literally, and we said, let's go. And now we're at about 27 FTEs, $3 million budget, 2,000 cases a year, and we still have plenty of room to grow. So when I ask my students what social issue matters most to you, it's always a broad range of things, and I'm sure you can imagine what some of the likely topics are. But each of us, as individuals, bring our concern in a way that's meaningful to us. Maybe it's born out of your family's history. Maybe it's from your personal experience. Maybe it's the story of a friend or a relative. Whatever it is, each person has the ability to effectuate meaningful change. We each have the power to advocate, to organize, all hail Jackie, to raise awareness, to start a not-for-profit, to call our elected officials, to write a letter to the editor, and by golly, to vote. So remember, any progress is a start in the right direction, and while we can't and shouldn't boil the ocean, it's already doing that on its own, let's each of us fix what we can while doing the best that we can to heal our world. Thanks so much for letting me join you tonight.